We sit here doing this training, and it may seem at times as if we are alone, as if we're doing this practice alone. But it's easy to look around and see that we're doing this practice together as a community. And it's easy to look at this community, either from the inside or looking at it from the outside, and see a clear distinction between inside and outside. Consider this to be a community of people who are practicing on our own, divided from the rest of the world. But if we look a bit harder, we see that there aren't such clear divisions. And in fact, we're all connected. And that it's those connections that run the world. This point is hard for us to see in our culture. We deeply believe in individualism, that individuals have run the world, changed the world. Our sense of history supports this view. But this is a shallow view, an inaccurate view. Connections change the world. People working together create history. The mind that's shared in a group, the assumptions, the views, the perspectives, the preferences that are shared, those control our future. And in the same way that for one person to want something that the group, the community they live in doesn't want, isn't going to change that community's actions. The same way, a community within the larger community of communities that wants something isn't going to be able to make a difference to the direction of the world. The assumptions and preferences that are shared, that are agreed upon, those run the world, and that's determined by seeing what it is that's shared between various communities, unifying them as one community. So, if we look at this vast world of many people doing many things in many communities with many different value systems, we see that the fact is, we need to face it, for many people, greed is good enough. There isn't a clearly set intention to overcome greed. Hatred is good enough. It's a perfectly good motivating force that should determine our actions. There isn't a clearly set intention to overcome that. Ignorance, not seeing things the way they really are, This is seen as good enough. There isn't a clearly set intention to overcome that. There isn't a sense of the value of self-cultivation, cultivation of our minds. If we consider, well, okay, we accept that. Of course, many people might not accept even that. We have a beauty is in the eye of the beholder sort of culture. And so I heard it said recently in a conversation about this that everyone can define their own enlightenment. Everyone can define enlightenment however they want, and that's enlightenment. That enlightenment is true enlightenment for them. But I couldn't help but say that is the opposite of enlightenment. Enlightenment is what is not up to you. That's what enlightenment is. Enlightenment is that which is prior to preferences, prior to opinions. And if that's the case, then there is something beyond what we think and what we want that is the standard, the criteria. And in that way, it is not the case that man is the measure of all things. There's something that's the measure of us. And it's our job to realize that, and certain people see that. There is something, actually. Well, what is that? Well, this alone is a big step. This alone is a big step, to seek truth, to seek good, to seek love. This is a big step that many people don't make. Those who do make it, often then they've made it, but then they get stuck. They get stuck in, say, scientific materialism. If we look at the modern world, that's a very common place to get stuck. Get stuck in humanism, secular humanism. Get stuck in, various forms of hedonism. Religious fundamentalism is one of these. It's hedonism, but the pleasure comes from views, attachment to views. The inner world is what we get stuck on as a source of pleasure. It's very difficult to go beyond this. These are, of course, spiritual traditions. Each of these is a spiritual tradition. And each of them derives its power. Each of them is one of the major spiritual traditions of the modern world, and they derive their power from the claim that they are not spiritual traditions, that they are not religions. And at any given time, in any given culture, the religion that can claim that it is not a religion is the dominant religion. That's what allows it to become that, and that's what allows it to stay, to remain that. The claim, this isn't a religion, this isn't a set of views. This is just the way it really is. So, many people get stuck in the conceptualization, get stuck in their heads, get stuck in scientific materialism. The belief, the concept that everything is matter. This, of course, is the most hypocritical view that I know of, because the very concept that everything is matter is proof that everything is not matter. The direct experience of that is itself already proof before the statement we've finished saying it. But we do get stuck there. We get stuck in that idea the idea that everything is matter, and that what matters is matter, that we should get more things, for example, and that deposits us in a certain kind of hedonism, a certain kind of attachment. It's also very difficult to transcend the self-centeredness, the supreme self-centeredness of humanism, in which we try to escape from the problem that we have no criterion on which to base our lives by simply defining our own feelings as that criterion. That we ourselves are the measure of whether we are the measure of all things. We get to decide whether we get to decide. It's very hard to get out of that. And of course, it's very difficult to get out of hedonism, out of attachment. Hedonism meaning desire for things of the world, more objects, the belief, for example, that if an economy grows, then everything gets better, that the basic way to solve all problems is with material acquisition. And the other form of hedonism, which is attachment to views. We get certain views that make us feel very good, and we hold to those views. These three traditions are very difficult to escape from. And yet, some people escape from them. But now, be aware, we've gone from the vast world down to just a few people, and now to even fewer people who can successfully escape from these various fixations. Those who do may find a true spiritual path in which a new kind of happiness becomes apparent, a new kind of love is affirmed, and an insight, a true insight into the way things are, is uncovered. This really exists, and many people experience this. But how many? Well, while it is many, compared to the world of human beings, it's very, very few. And yet, it's possible to go beyond even this. It's possible to go beyond even this, although this is an essential turning point. We can go beyond even that to the point of awakening. True awakening, in which the supreme happiness is directly experienced, the supreme love is directly encountered, the supreme truth is seen without mistake. This exists. Such a thing exists. However, now we're referring to very, very few people. Even to go back to the other stage, the prior stage, even if you consider how many people experience the bliss of spiritual rapture, the clarity of cutting through the human mind, the love that goes beyond any sense of me and other. Consider how many people you know who have that experience, who have ever had that experience. How many people are there in the world? And yet, however, while it's very few people, if you consider how many people use that to go beyond even all of that to true awakening, now the number is very small. And one might feel that this is the end. This is the highest stage, but it is possible to go further. Even after one has experienced awakening, one may still be attracted to a self-centered view on that and not open up to the true grandeur, the true possibility of the spiritual life. That it's possible to go beyond that to taking responsibility for changing our world, improving this world so that more and more people will go beyond views, go beyond self-centeredness, go beyond attachment, and experience awakening. We see that it's possible to structure a society in such a way that that happens more often. That there are ways of helping people to do that, and we want to change the world so that those ways are promoted and flourish. Naturally, the most important of all these ways is that we not destroy life. The most damaging thing we can do for regarding our spiritual path is to destroy life. And unfortunately, that is very common in the modern world. And in fact, human beings are destroying life at a greater rate right now than ever before in our history, and only a few occasions in the history of this planet match the destruction of life that we are knowingly participating in at this moment, on this day, right now. This step is vanishingly rare. The step from awakening to go beyond that, to return to the world and be of service. And there's a concept for this in the Buddhist tradition. It's called the bodhisattva, the bodhisattva ideal. A person who strives for awakening, but for the benefit of all beings, the benefit of all living things. And this here is a training center for bodhisattvas. That's what we are doing here. We're a bodhisattva training center, and that means that naturally the direct experience of awakening is taken as supremely important, and yet all the skills needed to have an impact on the world are included in this training, because once a person experiences awakening, one is expected to change the world, but not based on one's own self-centered ideas, but on the contrary, based on something beyond what each of us could have thought up, what any of us could have imagined, could have desired, could have preferred. This is a step beyond what people can possibly imagine, beyond what any human being could possibly imagine. All of the formulas for how to live a good life dissolve at this point, because awakening itself is the guide. Things like follow your bliss, follow your dreams, follow your gut, think it through. All of that dissolves away here. Even the sense, this is what I was born to do, even that isn't good enough anymore. Because we've gone beyond our own birth. We've gone beyond our own death. And something beyond all of that determines, decides our livelihood, our impact on the world. So, it might seem as if this would be the final stage. But simply for one person to try to be of service, we've seen clearly that that doesn't change the world. In order to change the world, we have to create a community. Because a community shares certain views, certain attitudes, certain perspectives, certain assumptions, certain preferences. And those shared internal experiences, those intersubjective experiences, are what run our society, because those define and steer our connections. And it's our connections that change the world. And so we create a community. We actually create a community. And in that community, certain customs, a certain culture, a certain society based on a certain mind emerges. This is very subtle, but this is power. This is true power. To create that. That changes history. And so it might seem as if this then must finally be the final stage. This is the highest possible level of spiritual development. We look around, we don't see very many people doing that. It seems extremely rare. We don't know if we see anyone doing that. So rare to create a society, a community, a culture based on true awakening. This is extremely rare. This is the complete transcendence even of the distinction between enlightenment and non-enlightenment. Because the enlightenment is completely merged with the non-enlightenment of a society. And yet that society's non-enlightenment, delusion, greed, hatred, is merged with a culture based on enlightenment. We no longer can tell what's what. We don't know what direction is up and down and left and right and forward and back. Because it's completely beyond conceptualization, human understanding. And yet it has not descended into mere irrationality, mere intuition, mere sloppiness of mind. The precision is impossible to describe. And this is so impressive and is so powerful. Is in fact the most powerful thing in the world. We might think, well then, this is the end. And yet even this thing that's the most powerful thing in the world, while not changing qualitatively, can change quantitatively, can change its degree. And that brings us to what truly changes the world. That is, while it's very important to create a community, what's most powerful is to create a community of communities. Because that community of communities provides us with the underlying mental substrate that is the basis of culture. And that is the glue that holds those communities together and can therefore become the glue that holds the world together and steers, drives human history. Therefore, here we dedicate ourselves to that level of spiritual development. A level of spiritual development so extreme that we can do that work, each of us here, dedicated to do that level of work from the perspective of awakening. And of course we come here and we can't even eat a meal from the perspective of awakening. We can't even take a breath from the perspective of awakening. We can't even say a single sentence from the perspective of awakening. We acknowledge that, but we don't become discouraged. We have endless courage. We bring forth endless fortitude because we know, due to our deep compassion, that this is what the world needs. That someone has to do it. And so here we are to do it. We are going to do it because we're not going to ask someone else to. We take this responsibility to save life on earth. We take responsibility to go even beyond that and bring all living beings to awakening. And we take responsibility for doing that right now, today, in this lifetime, with the relationships, the connections we have right here. This is our dedication. This is the reason that we put forth a dedication to create a community of dozens, hundreds, or more communities, holding together, working for the benefit, the true benefit of all living things.